Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the dead world of New Geneva spin slowly below. The massive Imperial fleet hung in space around him like a collection of steel predators, their weapons pointed at empty darkness. Something was very wrong here. 3 days ago, all communication from New Geneva had stopped. The human colony had been sending regular reports to Imperial Command every week for 15 years. Then nothing. Complete silence. Kethvar had not been worried at first. Humans were known for their poor technology. Their machines broke down, often. Their communication systems were weak and unreliable. The Admiral had expected to find broken equipment or maybe a small rebellion that needed crushing. But this was different. This was impossible. The orbital stations around New Geneva were destroyed. Twisted metal floated in space where proud structures had once stood. The planet's surface showed massive scars from energy weapons. Entire cities had been burned away, leaving only glass craters in the ground. But there were no bodies, no wreckage from human ships, no signs of who had attacked or why. "Admiral," his communications officer called out. "We have completed the full scan of the system. No life signs detected on the planet's surface. No human vessels found anywhere in the system." Kethvar's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the data. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for 3,000 years. They knew every species, every weapon, every type of attack pattern. But this destruction matched nothing in their databases. "What about the defense platforms?" he asked. "Destroyed, sir. But the strange thing is how they were destroyed. The energy signatures don't match any known Imperial weapons. They don't match any rebel weapons either. The platforms were cut apart by some kind of focused energy beam, but our computers cannot identify the source." The Admiral's aide, a young Zephyrian named Veltar, stepped forward nervously. "Sir, could this be the work of an unknown species? Perhaps something from beyond our borders?" Kethvar made a dismissive gesture with his lower arms. "Impossible. Our long-range scouts monitor all approaches to Imperial space. Nothing gets past our sensors. Besides, who would waste time attacking a worthless human colony? New Geneva produced nothing of value. The humans there were farmers and miners, nothing more." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his mind. The humans had always been strange. Most species joined the Empire willingly, seeing the benefits of Imperial protection and technology. Others fought brief wars before surrendering. But humans were different. They never seemed to understand their place in the galactic order. When the Empire first encountered humanity 50 years ago, the humans had been confined to one small solar system. Their technology was primitive. Their ships could barely travel between planets, let alone stars. The Empire had offered them membership as a junior species, giving them access to faster-than-light travel and basic Imperial technology in exchange for settling frontier worlds that other species found too dangerous or worthless. Most species would have been grateful. Humans complained constantly. They questioned Imperial laws. They demanded representation in the Imperial Council, despite being newcomers with nothing to offer. They insisted on settling worlds that were far from trade routes, claiming they wanted independence and room to grow. The Empire had allowed this because human colonies served a useful purpose. They settled on worlds with harsh climates, dangerous wildlife, or poor resources. Worlds that more advanced species did not want. The humans seemed to thrive in these difficult places, somehow making worthless planets productive. It saved the Empire the trouble of terraforming these worlds themselves. New Geneva had been one of these frontier colonies. A cold world with long winters and poor soil. The humans had been there for 15 years, growing crops that other species could not. Eat and mining metals that more advanced civilizations had better substitutes for. Why would anyone attack such a place? "Sir," the sensor officer interrupted his thoughts. "We're detecting some unusual readings from the planet's northern continent." "What kind of readings?" "Energy traces, sir. Very faint. The computer cannot identify the source, but they appear to be concentrated around what used to be the main human settlement." Kethvar considered this. Perhaps there were survivors after all. Maybe some humans had hidden in underground shelters and were now trying to send distress signals. "Prepare a landing party. I want a full investigation of that area." "Admiral," Veltar said quietly, "perhaps we should request additional ships before—" "Additional ships?" Kethvar's voice carried the tone that had made him famous throughout the fleet. "You think we need more than 200 Imperial vessels to handle whatever destroyed a primitive human colony? Are you questioning my judgment, Veltar?" The young officer's skin turned pale blue with fear. "No, Admiral, of course not." But as the landing shuttles prepared to launch, strange reports began coming in from across the fleet. Sensors were detecting brief energy spikes that appeared and vanished too quickly to track. Communication systems were picking up faint signals that seemed to be in human languages, but the universal translators could not decode them. Some crew members reported hearing whispers in the corridors of their ships, though the ship computers detected no unauthorized transmissions. Kethvar dismissed these reports as nervous reactions from crew members who were unsettled by the mystery of New Geneva. Space was full of strange energy patterns and radiation that could cause equipment malfunctions. As for the whispers, that was obviously the result of too much time in space and too many stories told in the mess halls. The landing party reached the planet's surface and began exploring the ruins of the human capital city. What they found made no sense. The buildings had not been destroyed by explosions or energy weapons. They had been twisted, as if reality itself had been bent around them. Metal structures were turned inside out. Concrete walls showed ripples, like frozen water. Glass had been turned into spirals that hurt to look at. But strangest of all, there were signs that the humans had been in the middle of their daily activities when whatever happened occurred. Meals were still on tables, though the food had rotted away years ago. Vehicles were parked in neat rows as if their owners had just stepped away. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere, but not in the pattern of people fleeing in panic. It was as if the humans had simply vanished in the middle of ordinary life. The landing party found one more thing that chilled Admiral Kethvar when they reported back. In the center of the ruined city was a crater filled with a substance that their equipment could not identify. It looked like liquid metal, but it moved without any wind or vibration to disturb it. When the scientists tried to take samples, their instruments malfunctioned. The substance seemed to absorb energy, growing slightly larger each time they tested it, and in the depths of that strange liquid metal, the sensors detected something that should not have been possible. Organized patterns, mathematical sequences, almost like the firing patterns of neurons in a living brain. Admiral Kethvar stared at the reports and felt the first stirring of unease. In 300 years of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. Whatever had happened to New Geneva was beyond his understanding, but he was a warrior of the Empire, trained to face any threat. He would solve this mystery and add another victory to his record. He had no idea that high above them something was watching. Something that had once been human. Something that remembered what the Empire had done and was preparing to make them pay for every life they had taken. The hunt was about to begin. 3 days had passed since the Imperial fleet arrived at New Geneva. Admiral Kethvar had not slept well. The reports from the planet's surface made no sense. His scientists could not explain what had twisted the human city into impossible shapes. His engineers could not identify the strange metal substance that moved like it was alive. The Admiral stood in his private quarters, studying star charts and trying to understand what could have destroyed an entire human colony without leaving any evidence. The door chimed, and his aide Veltar entered with another data pad full of confusing reports. "Sir, long-range sensors have detected something approaching from the outer system." Kethvar looked up from his charts. "What kind of something? Imperial reinforcements?" "No, sir. It appears to be a single vessel. But the readings are unusual." The Admiral followed Veltar to the bridge, where the sensor officer was staring at his instruments with obvious confusion. The crew stood at their stations, but Kethvar could sense their nervousness. Word of the strange discoveries on New Geneva had spread through the fleet despite his orders to keep the information classified. "Report," Kethvar commanded. "Sir, the contact is still 6 hours away, but our sensors are picking up contradictory information. Sometimes it reads as large as one of our heavy cruisers. Other times it barely registers at all. The energy signature keeps changing. Malfunction in our equipment? We've run full diagnostics 3 times, sir. All systems are working normally. Whatever is out there, it's doing something to our sensors that we don't understand." Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical display. A single ship approaching his fleet of 200 vessels. Either the pilot was insane, or they had technology that made them confident they could face the entire Imperial Navy alone. Neither possibility was comforting. Battle stations. All ships are to maintain defensive formation around New Geneva. If this vessel is hostile, I want to be ready. Hours passed slowly as the unknown ship approached. The closer it got, the stranger the sensor readings became. Sometimes it appeared to be moving faster than light without using any known FTL drive. Other times it seemed to stop completely, only to appear in a different location moments later. When the ship finally came into visual range, the entire bridge fell silent. It was definitely human in origin. The basic design matched the crude ships that humans had been building for the past 50 years. But this vessel had been changed in ways that hurt to look at. The hull was covered with patches of Imperial technology that had been welded and grafted onto the human frame like mechanical scars. Weapons that belonged to a dozen different species were mounted along its sides. Energy conduits that glowed, with impossible colors ran across the surface like veins. But strangest of all was the way space seemed to bend around the ship. The stars behind it were distorted, stretched into spirals that made navigation computers crash when they tried to calculate the vessel's exact position. It was as if the ship existed in several dimensions at once, never quite fitting properly into normal space. "Admiral," the communications officer said in a shaky voice, "I'm receiving a transmission." "Put it through." But instead of words coming through the speakers, something else happened. Every person on the bridge suddenly heard a voice speaking, directly inside their minds. The voice was human, but it carried undertones that no human throat could produce. It spoke in perfect Imperial standard, each word clear and cold. "Imperial forces, you have entered human space without permission. You will withdraw immediately." Admiral Kethvar felt anger burn through his fear. No one gave orders to the Imperial Navy, especially not humans. "This is Admiral Kethvar of the Imperial Fleet. You are one ship facing 200. Identify yourself and prepare to be boarded." The voice in their minds laughed, and the sound made several crew members grab their heads in pain. "I am what remains of New Geneva. I am the voice of 800,000 human souls who died because of Imperial lies. I am called the Revenant, and I have come to collect what is owed." The Admiral's blood turned cold. The Revenant. The name meant one who returns from the dead. But that was impossible. The humans of New Geneva were dead. The planet was empty. "You're lying. We found no survivors on New Geneva. You found no survivors because we are no longer alive. Not as you understand life. But we remember. We remember everything the Empire did to us. And now we will make you remember too." Kethvar had heard enough. Whatever trick this was, one ship could not threaten his entire fleet. "All vessels, target that ship. Prepare to fire." The Revenant did not try to escape. It simply vanished. Not like a ship jumping to faster than light travel. Not like a cloaking device hiding it from sensors. The vessel just stopped existing in the space where it had been. The sensors showed empty void. Visual scans showed nothing but stars. "Where did it go?" Kethvar demanded. "Unknown, sir. It's not showing up on any of our instruments." Then the screaming started. On the outer edge of the fleet, 3 Imperial destroyers exploded simultaneously, but these were not normal explosions. The ships were cut apart by lines of force that appeared from nowhere, slicing through armor and hull like they were made of paper. The cuts were so precise that the destroyed vessels fell apart in perfect geometric shapes. Battle stations. All ships, evasive maneuvers. But how do you fight an enemy you cannot see? The Revenant appeared again, this time directly behind the Imperial flagship. Before any of the weapons could target it, the Phantom ship fired a single beam of energy that passed through the flagship's shields as if they were not there. The beam did not damage the ship. Instead, it connected to the main computer system, and suddenly every screen on the bridge was showing images that made no sense. Views of human families living peaceful lives on New Geneva. Children playing in streets that were now twisted ruins. People working in fields that were now craters of strange metal. Then the images changed. They showed Imperial ships arriving at New Geneva. But not 3 days ago. This was months earlier. The humans were not fighting. They were trying to communicate, sending peaceful messages to the Imperial vessels. The next images showed what the Empire had done. Scientists in Imperial uniforms were setting up equipment on the planet's surface, devices that looked like the sensors Kethvar's team had found in the ruins. But these were not sensors. They were weapons. Experimental weapons designed to test new ways of destroying entire populations. The humans had not been killed by unknown attackers. They had been murdered by the Empire itself. New Geneva had been chosen as a testing ground for dimensional warfare technology. The experiment had worked, but not as planned. Instead of simply killing the humans, it had torn them out of normal space and trapped them in a realm between dimensions. Lies, Admiral Kethvar whispered, but his voice shook. Imperial Command would never authorize such experiments. The voice of the Revenant filled their minds again. Imperial Command authorized the total extinction of the Kalari species to test biological weapons. Imperial Command destroyed the homeworld of the Tanish people to test planet-killing devices. Imperial Command has conducted experiments on 43 different worlds over the past century. New Geneva was just the latest. The images on the screens continued showing the truth. Documents with official Imperial seals, orders signed by the highest levels of command, video recordings of Imperial officers discussing how to dispose of test subjects after the experiments were complete. Admiral Kethvar stared at the evidence and felt his worldview crumble. He had served the Empire for 300 years, believing he was bringing order and peace to the galaxy. But if these records were real, then he had been serving monsters. The Revenant vanished again, and this time it did not reappear, but its voice echoed one final time in the minds of every Imperial. Soldier in the fleet, we died so you could learn new ways to kill. Now you will learn what it feels like to be hunted. Run, Admiral, run fast and far. But know that we will find you wherever you go. The dead do not forget. The dead do not forgive. The Imperial fleet remained in formation around New Geneva for 6 more hours, but no one spoke of victory anymore. They had encountered something beyond their understanding, something that challenged everything they believed about the Empire they served. When Admiral Kethvar finally gave the order to withdraw, not one of his officers questioned the command. They were warriors, trained to face any enemy. But how do you fight the ghosts of your own crimes? The hunt had begun. Admiral Kethvar had not slept properly in 3 weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the twisted ruins of New Geneva and heard the voice of the Revenant promising revenge. His fleet had withdrawn from human space, but the Phantom ship had followed them. The attacks began small. Supply convoys would report strange sensor readings, then disappear completely. Search and rescue teams would find the ships floating dead in space, their crews gone and their cargo holds empty. But there were no signs of weapons fire, no evidence of boarding parties. The ships were simply empty, as if their crews had walked into the vacuum of space. Then the Revenant began targeting military installations. The Imperial listening post at Kalar 7 was the first major strike. The base had been built inside an asteroid, protected by shields and weapons that could destroy entire fleets. But when the morning shift arrived, they found the asteroid hollowed out like an empty shell. 3,000 Imperial personnel had vanished without a trace. The Phantom ship left only one sign of its presence. A message burned into the asteroid's remaining metal structure in human writing. We remember the children of Kalar 7. Now, you know how it feels to lose everything. Admiral Kethvar studied the reports in his quarters, trying to understand the pattern. Kalar 7 had been mentioned in the files the Revenant had shown them. 20 years ago, Imperial forces had used the colony there to test new biological weapons. The entire population had been infected with a disease that killed within hours. Imperial records listed it as a medical emergency that required quarantine. But the true files showed it had been deliberate murder, disguised as an accident. Now something was hunting down every Imperial facility connected to those secret experiments, and it was doing so with knowledge that should not exist. The Revenant seemed to know the location of every hidden base, every classified project, every covered-up atrocity in Imperial history. Sir, Veltar entered his quarters with another report. The Revenant has been sighted near the Zerion shipyards. Kethvar stood quickly. Zerion was one of the Empire's most important military construction facilities. If the Revenant attacked there, it could cripple Imperial ship production for years. How many ships do we have in that sector? 12 heavy cruisers, sir. But based on previous encounters, that may not be enough. The Admiral had been thinking the same thing. Every Imperial commander who had faced the Revenant reported the same impossible phenomena. The Phantom ship could appear and disappear at will. It could pass through shields as if they were not there. Its weapons left no energy signatures, making it impossible to defend against them. But worse than the ship's abilities were the psychological effects it had on Imperial crews. Soldiers reported seeing dead humans in the corridors of their ships. Officers claimed to hear voices speaking in human languages during the night watch. Some crew members had been found in their quarters, staring at empty space and whispering apologies to people who were not there. Sir, there's something else, Veltar continued. We've been monitoring Imperial communication networks. The Revenant has been broadcasting files throughout the Empire, classified documents about the experimental programs, evidence of war crimes, lists of species that the Empire secretly exterminated. This was Kethvar's greatest fear. If the truth about Imperial activities became public knowledge, it would cause rebellions across the galaxy. The Empire ruled through a combination of military strength and the belief that Imperial law brought peace and order to chaos. If people learned that the Empire was responsible for genocide and mass murder, that belief would collapse. What kind of response are we seeing? Several worlds have demanded investigations into Imperial activities in their sectors. The Harani Confederation is threatening to withdraw from the Empire unless they receive explanations for the deaths of their colonists on Harani Prime. The Volcari Assembly has voted to stop sending troops to Imperial forces. Admiral Kethvar felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He had dedicated his life to serving the Empire, believing it represented the best hope for galactic civilization. But the evidence the Revenant had shown was undeniable. The Empire had committed unspeakable crimes, and now those crimes were being exposed to every species in the galaxy. The communication system chimed, indicating an urgent message from Imperial Command. Kethvar activated the secure channel and found himself facing Grand Admiral Zephys, the Supreme Commander of all Imperial forces. Kethvar, your reports about this Phantom ship are causing panic throughout the High Command. The Emperor himself has demanded an explanation for how a single human vessel is terrorizing our fleets. Sir, this is not an ordinary ship. The Revenant appears to be operating with technology we do not understand. It can phase between dimensions, pass through our defenses, and strike without warning. I don't care what technology it uses. You have 200 ships under your command. Find this Phantom and destroy it. Sir, I respectfully request additional resources. Perhaps we should also consider investigating the claims the Revenant has made about Imperial experimental programs. Grand Admiral Zephys cut him off with a sharp gesture. There will be no investigation of classified programs. Your job is to destroy this terrorist ship and restore order to the sector. If you cannot accomplish this mission, I will find someone who can. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with his doubts. He had served under Zephys for 50 years and had never questioned the Grand Admiral's orders, but the evidence the Revenant had shown was too detailed to be fabricated. If even half of those documents were real, then the Empire had committed genocide against dozens of species. His thoughts were interrupted by an emergency alert. The Phantom ship had appeared at Zerion. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted only minutes. The Revenant materialized directly inside the shipyard's defensive perimeter, ignoring shields and weapons that should have destroyed any vessel. Instead of attacking the ships under construction, it began broadcasting on all frequencies. Every person at Zerion, from the commanding officers to the maintenance workers, suddenly heard the voice of the Revenant speaking in their minds. But this time, it was not speaking to them. Instead, they were hearing the voices of the dead. The Phantom ship had somehow captured the final moments of every person killed in Imperial experiments. Thousands of voices, speaking in dozens of languages, all asking the same question. Why did you kill us? What did we do to deserve this? Among the voices were children who had died in biological weapon tests, farmers who had been vaporized to test new energy weapons, Scientists who had been murdered to keep Imperial experiments secret, all of them speaking at once, their voices growing louder and more desperate with each passing moment. The psychological impact was devastating. Imperial personnel began breaking down, some falling to their knees and begging forgiveness from voices only they could hear. Others tried to shut down their communication systems, but the voices were coming from inside their own minds. Then the Revenant did something that terrified Admiral Kethvar more than any weapon could have. Instead of destroying the Zerion shipyards, it began converting them. The Phantom ship somehow took control of the automated construction systems and began building something new. Ships that were part human design, part Imperial technology, and part something else entirely. Within hours, a dozen new vessels emerged from the construction bays. They looked like smaller versions of the Revenant, with the same reality-bending properties and the same impossible energy signatures. The Phantom ship had not come to destroy Imperial shipyards. It had come to take them over and turn Imperial resources against the Empire itself. As reports of the incident spread throughout the galaxy, something changed in the political landscape. Species that had been loyal to the Empire for centuries began asking hard questions about Imperial activities in their territories. Rebellions that had been brewing for decades suddenly erupted into open warfare. The Revenant was not just hunting Imperial forces, it was systematically dismantling the Empire's ability to control the galaxy through fear and deception. Every attack exposed more crimes, revealed more lies, and turned more species against Imperial rule. Admiral Kethvar realized that he was not facing a terrorist or a rebel. He was facing the collective will of every species the Empire had wronged, given form and purpose by human determination and interdimensional technology. The Phantom ship was not trying to conquer the Empire. It was trying to free the galaxy from it, and it was winning. The Empire was falling apart, and Admiral Kethvar could see it happening from the bridge of his flagship. 6 months had passed since the Revenant first appeared, and the Phantom ship had become something far more dangerous than a single vessel, seeking revenge. It had become the symbol of rebellion across the galaxy. Every day brought new reports of uprisings on Imperial worlds. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were remembering their lost independence. Colonial governments were declaring themselves free from Imperial rule. Even some Imperial military units were refusing orders, claiming they would not serve an organization that had committed genocide. The Revenant had not been idle during these months. The Phantom ship and its growing fleet of converted vessels were striking at the heart of Imperial power. Secret research facilities were being destroyed or taken over. Hidden files were being broadcast across the galaxy. Imperial officials who had been involved in the experimental programs were disappearing one by one. But today was different. Today, the Revenant had sent a message directly to Admiral Kethvar's personal communication system, a message that no one else in the Imperial fleet had received. Admiral, we know you have seen the truth. We know you understand what the Empire has done. Meet us at the coordinates we are sending. Come alone. It is time for you to choose which side of history you wish to stand on. Kethvar stared at the message for a long time. In 6 months of hunting the Revenant, he had learned things about the Empire that had shattered his faith in everything he had believed. The experimental programs were real. The genocide was real. The cover-ups and lies were all real. He had tried to report these discoveries to Imperial Command, but his messages were blocked or ignored. When he persisted, Grand Admiral Zephys had threatened him with court-martial for spreading seditious propaganda. It had become clear that the highest levels of Imperial leadership knew about the atrocities and had chosen to cover them up rather than face justice. The coordinates the Revenant had sent led to a small system on the edge of Imperial space, a system that had once been home to the Altari people before Imperial colonization had wiped them out to make room for mining operations. Official records claimed the Altari had died from a plague. The real files showed they had been poisoned, so their world could be strip-mined for rare metals. Kethvar made his decision. He told his crew he was taking a shuttle to investigate suspicious readings in the target system. It was not entirely a lie. The Revenant was certainly suspicious. But instead of bringing his fleet, he went alone. The Phantom ship was waiting for him when he arrived. It hung in space near the dead Altari homeworld. its impossible hull shifting and changing as reality bent around it. This close, Kethvar could see details that had not shown up on long-range sensors. The ship was not just built from salvaged materials. Parts of it seemed to be made from crystallized energy, solid light given form and substance. Board us, Admiral. We have much to discuss. The voice of the Revenant spoke directly in his mind, but this time it did not carry the cold anger he had heard before. It sounded tired, sad, like someone who had carried a terrible burden for too long. Kethvar docked his shuttle with the Revenant's main bay, not knowing what to expect. Would he find the ghosts of dead humans? Some kind of alien technology beyond his understanding? What he found instead was far stranger. The interior of the Revenant looked like a city. Not a ship, but an actual city with buildings and streets and parks. But everything was made from the same crystallized energy as the hull. People moved through the streets, but they were not quite solid. They looked like humans, but they glowed with inner light and sometimes became transparent. Welcome aboard, Admiral. The voice came from a woman who approached him near the docking bay. She looked young, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of practical clothing that colonists wore. But her eyes held depths that no human eyes should contain. I am Captain Sarah Chen. I was the mayor of New Geneva before the Empire murdered my people. Now I am the voice that speaks for the Revenant. Kethvar tried to understand what he was seeing. You're dead. The report said there were no survivors. Death is not as final as your people believe, Admiral. When Imperial weapons tore us out of normal space, we did not simply cease to exist. We were pulled into the spaces between dimensions, where consciousness can survive without physical form. We learned to exist as pure thought and will. She gestured to the city around them. This ship is not built from metal and circuits. It is built from our collective memory and determination. Every person who died on New Geneva contributes to its structure. We are the Revenant, and the Revenant is us. As they walked through the streets of light, Captain Chen showed him the truth about what had happened to New Geneva. The Imperial Experimental Facility had not been trying to develop new weapons. They had been trying to create a new form of existence, consciousness without physical form that could be controlled and directed by Imperial will. They wanted to turn entire populations into slaves that could not rebel because they would have no bodies to fight with, Chen explained. Living computers made from the souls of conquered peoples. But the experiment went wrong. Instead of creating slaves, they created something that could exist between dimensions and could not be stopped by normal weapons. Kethvar felt sick. How many people knew about this program? Everyone at the highest levels of Imperial command. The Emperor himself signed the authorization. New Geneva was chosen because we were far from major trade routes. No one would miss us if the experiment failed. They reached the center of the Crystal City, where a great hall held thousands of figures made from light. Each one was a person who had died on New Geneva, preserved in energy and memory. Children who had been playing in the streets when the dimensional rift opened. Families who had been sitting down to dinner. Workers who had been tending their farms. All of them had become part of the Revenant. All of them remembered what had been done to them. Why show me this? Kethvar asked. Because you are not like the others, Admiral. We have been watching you for months. We have seen your reports to Imperial Command, asking for investigations into the experimental programs. We have seen you struggle with the truth about what the Empire has done. Captain Chen turned to face him directly. The Empire is going to fall, Admiral. Too many people know the truth now. Too many species have learned what Imperial rule really means. But when it falls, what will replace it? Chaos? War between 1,000 different factions? Or something better? She gestured to the assembled spirits of New Geneva. We could have chosen simple revenge. We could have used our abilities to destroy every Imperial world, to make your species extinct as payment for what was done to us. But that would make us no better than the Empire. What do you want from me? We want you to help us build something better. A confederation of free species working together instead of one empire ruling through fear. But for that to work, we need people from within the Imperial system who understand that change is necessary. Kethvar looked around at the City of Light. at the preserved souls of people who had been murdered for the crime of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He thought about his 300 years of service to the Empire, about the battles he had fought, believing he was bringing peace to the galaxy. All of it had been built on lies. If I help you, I will be branded a traitor by everyone I have ever served with. Yes, Captain Chen said simply, but you will be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you chose to stand with the victims instead of the killers. Admiral Kethvar made his choice. When he returned to his flagship, he carried with him a complete copy of Imperial records that the Revenant had compiled over months of raids on secret facilities. Evidence of crimes that reached back centuries. Proof that the Empire's entire structure was built on the systematic murder of anyone who stood in their way. He began broadcasting these files on every communication channel in his fleet. Within hours, half his ships had declared themselves in rebellion against Imperial command. Within days, the rebellion had spread to a dozen other fleets. The Empire's final battle was about to begin. But it would not be fought with weapons alone. It would be fought with truth against lies, justice against oppression, and hope against despair. The dead of New Geneva had started something that could not be stopped. The galaxy would finally learn what freedom looked like. The final battle for the Empire began not with weapons, but with words. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship as it approached the Imperial capital system. Behind him flew a fleet unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Imperial ships, commanded by officers who had chosen justice over blind loyalty. Vessels from a dozen different species who had thrown off Imperial rule. And leading them all was the Revenant, no longer hiding in the shadows but flying openly as the symbol of galactic freedom. The phantom ship had grown since their first encounter. Fed by the collective will of every species the Empire had wronged, it now stretched for kilometers through space. Its hull showed the faces of millions of victims, their images shifting and changing like living memory. When it moved, reality itself seemed to bend around it, as if the universe was making room for something that should not exist, but had every right to be there. Imperial capital system in visual range, his sensor officer reported. The woman's voice was steady, but Kethvar could hear the awe beneath her professional tone. They were looking at the heart of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. The imperial capital world of Zephyros hung before them like a jewel, surrounded by thousands of defensive platforms and the largest concentration of military ships in galactic history. The Imperial home fleet contained vessels from every corner of the empire, called back to defend the seat of power from the growing rebellion. But something was wrong with the formation. Instead of the tight defensive grid that Imperial doctrine demanded, the ships were scattered in loose groups. Some vessels showed signs of battle damage that had nothing to do with enemy action. Kethvar realized what he was seeing. The Imperial home fleet was fighting itself. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from multiple Imperial vessels. Some are demanding our surrender. Others are requesting permission to join our fleet." The Empire was tearing itself apart. The truth about Imperial crimes had spread too far and too fast to be contained. Even here, at the center of Imperial power, officers and crew members were choosing sides. Some remained loyal to the Empire, despite knowing about the atrocities. Others could not stomach serving an organization built on genocide. The voice of the Revenant filled the minds of everyone in both fleets, but this time it spoke with the voices of countless victims. Children who had died in biological weapon tests, scientists who had been murdered to hide Imperial experiments, entire species that had been wiped out for convenience. People of the Empire, look upon your leaders and see them for what they truly are. We do not come for conquest, we come for justice. We come so that the dead may finally rest and the living may finally be free. The phantom ship began broadcasting on every communication channel in the system. Not propaganda or military commands, but the complete files of Imperial crimes. Thousands of hours of video evidence, millions of documents bearing official seals, the testimony of survivors who had been told their families died from natural disasters or alien attacks, when the truth was that they had been murdered by their own government. Psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Across the Imperial fleet, crew members began refusing orders. Some ships simply shut down their weapons and withdrew from formation. Others turned their guns on vessels that remained loyal to the corrupt leadership. Grand Admiral Zephys, commanding from the massive Imperial dreadnought supremacy, tried to maintain order through increasingly desperate threats. All vessels will maintain formation and prepare to engage the rebel fleet. Any ship that disobeys will be destroyed as an example to the others. But his own crew was already in rebellion. Bridge officers were questioning orders. Enlisted personnel were demanding explanations for the crimes shown in the broadcasts. The ship's internal security forces found themselves outnumbered by crew members who had decided they could no longer serve the Empire. Admiral Kethvar watched the Imperial fleet dissolve into chaos and felt no joy in the sight. These were good people, most of them. Soldiers who had believed they were serving something noble and just. They did not deserve to pay for the crimes of their leaders. The Revenant seemed to understand this. Instead of attacking the confused and divided Imperial ships, the Phantom vessel did something unprecedented. It began rescuing them. Ships that had suffered damage during the internal fighting found their hull breaches sealed by beams of crystallized energy from the Revenant. Vessels that had lost power discovered their systems restored by the Phantom. Ship's impossible technology. Crew members who had been injured during mutinies were healed by energies that turned their wounds into light before making them whole again. The message was clear. The Revenant had not come to destroy the Imperial military. It had come to free them from leaders who saw their own people as expendable resources. The final confrontation came when the Revenant approached the supremacy directly. Grand Admiral Zephys, seeing his fleet abandon him and his empire crumbling around him, made one last desperate attempt to maintain power. All remaining loyal vessels target the Revenant. Use planet-killer weapons if necessary. I would rather see this system destroyed than surrender to terrorists. But the Phantom ship was ready for this. As the remaining loyal Imperial vessels charged their most powerful weapons, the Revenant did something that redefined everyone's understanding of what was possible. It absorbed the energy. Every weapon fired at the Phantom ship, from simple laser cannons to planet-killing antimatter bombs, was drawn into the Revenant's crystalline hull and converted into more power for its own systems. The ship grew larger and brighter with each attack, as if the Empire's own hatred was being transformed into something clean and pure. Then the Revenant struck back. But instead of destroying the attacking ships, it reached out to every computer system in the Imperial fleet and began showing them one final truth. The ultimate secret of the Empire was revealed to every person in the capital system. The Emperor himself was nothing more than a figurehead. The real power belonged to a council of species who had conquered the galaxy not through military might, but through deception and murder. They had convinced every other species that the Empire brought peace and order, while secretly eliminating anyone who might challenge their control. The evidence was undeniable. Video recordings of council meetings where they discussed which species to exterminate next. Financial records showing how they profited from the resources of murdered civilizations. Personal communications where they laughed about the primitive species who believed Imperial propaganda about justice and equality. When the truth was finally revealed in its entirety, the last vestiges of Imperial loyalty collapsed. Even the most devoted soldiers could not continue serving an organization that saw them as nothing more than useful tools to be discarded when convenient. Grand Admiral Zephys found himself alone on the bridge of the supremacy, his entire crew having abandoned their posts rather than continue fighting for a lie. He sent one final transmission to the Revenant, his voice filled with the bitter anger of a man who had wasted his life serving monsters. You think you've won, but you've only created chaos. Without the Empire, the galaxy will tear itself apart in war. Captain Sarah Chen materialized on his bridge, her form made of crystallized light but somehow more real than the metal and circuits around her. The Empire was the chaos, Admiral. What we're building is the peace that comes when people are free to choose their own destiny. The Phantom ship began to fade as its mission came to an end. The Revenant had never been about conquest or revenge. It had been about justice. Now that the truth was known and the Empire had fallen, the collective will that had given it form was finally at peace. But before it vanished completely, The Revenant left behind one final gift: seeds of the crystallized energy that had formed. Its hull, distributed to every world that had suffered under Imperial rule. Each seed contained the memories of those who had died for freedom and the knowledge of how to build something better. Admiral Kethvar stood on his bridge as the Revenant faded away, taking with it the last hope of the old order. Around him, the galaxy was already changing. Species that had been enemies under Imperial rule were beginning to talk to each other as equals. Worlds that had been stripped of resources were receiving aid from their neighbors. The Federation that Captain Chen had envisioned was being born from the ashes of the Empire. The Phantom ship was gone, but its message remained. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from destroying your enemies, but from showing them the truth about themselves. The dead of New Geneva had found their justice, and in doing so, they had freed an entire galaxy. In the years that followed, children across 1,000 worlds would learn the story of the Revenant, how the ghosts of the murdered had returned, not for revenge, but for justice, how the truth had proven more powerful than any weapon, how a single colony of farmers and miners had brought down the greatest empire in galactic history simply by refusing to let their deaths be forgotten. The galaxy had learned what humans had always known, that some things are worth dying for, and some truths are worth any sacrifice to reveal. The empire was gone, but freedom would endure forever.